So hey everyone, my name is Connor. I'm a technical product manager here at brand Expedia, just downstairs in engineering. You're very, very welcome to tonight's Tech Know-How event. We are super excited to have you here. The reason we do these Tech Know-How events is to basically share a subset of the problems we face here as a company. And this isn't because we think we have all the answers and all the solutions, but more by retrospecting on these challenges ourselves and then sharing them, we actually learn something, right? And I guess the added benefit is hopefully you guys will learn something as well. So one of our mission goals here at Expedia is to revolutionize travel through the power of technology. So what we have learned here is that you do not revolutionize anything by standing still, okay? And never changing. Now, I don't know if you guys are aware or not, but over the last 8-9 years, this company's had a pretty big turnaround, okay? One of the things that's really helped that and driven that is a commitment as a company to building a workplace where we're not afraid to try new things. People are not afraid to fail, people are not afraid to challenge the status quo. We try a lot, we fail a lot, we learn a lot, and we keep going. Okay? So you can see this in our ever-changing tech stack. So years ago we started with this big monolithic .NET application. We used to release it once every quarter or something mad like that. Then we had a service-oriented architecture, now we're moving into micro apps, microservices. You can also see it in our commitment to agile methodologies, and for me personally, the biggest observation, the biggest way you see this in Expedia is through a cultural commitment to test and learn as a philosophy, and that's across the whole organization. So not just engineering, but in product as well. Okay, and that's cool because tonight we're doing something a little bit different. Normally these talks are very tech focused. Tonight we're coming at it from a product angle. Our presenter is Sam. He comes from Denver, Colorado. He's got an incredible passion for both Justin Bieber and football t-shirts. Sam is a senior product manager for the checkout team downstairs, and tonight's talk is the science of product. So give it up for Sam.
Thank you, Connor. Thank you for reading that word for word as I wrote. How are we doing on sound? If I just talk like this, do you guys want to go higher? Are you good? Okay, great. All right. As Connor said, I'm Sam. I'm a product manager here at Expedia. I specifically work on checkout. So anytime you are hopefully buying something on our site and we're collecting your information and payment, those are the pages and the functionality that I work on. However, for tonight, I'll be talking about our general overall product org and culture. So before we jump in, a couple things to note. If you guys get up in the middle of this and want to grab a drink or more food, totally fine. I'm not going to say I won't heckle you, but feel free to do it. Past that, if I can just get a sense of who we have here, I think it'll help me tailor a little bit, also understand who may call me out on any BS that I say. Especially external people, are people, show of hands, work in technology today? Okay, cool. And of those, are we more in development and test roles? Great. Anyone in product? Oh, great. All right. Design, analytics, marketing. Great. Connor? Okay, great. Thank you. So let's get started. So tonight we're going to talk about the science of product and how Expedia uses science to bring a focus to what we deliver. And two things I want to do before we get started is benchmark what I mean by both product management and science methodology. So, there's a lot of different definitions of product management depending on the role that you play in an organization, the industry you're in. I'm using a fairly basic one here of the product manager is the person responsible for setting the vision and deciding what your engineering resources work on next. That person is then responsible for those decisions they made. So you need to know what vision you have and what decisions you're making and why, and then be accountable for those. So as we walk through this, that's the side I'm using. And there's obviously a lot of other roles in addition to that. All right, so the definition of the scientific method. I'm going to start just by reading an Oxford Dictionary defined. Scientific method is a method of procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century. consisting in systematic observation, measurement, and experiment, and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. So I added basically what was shown on the internet, and overall, if everyone can't see this, we're talking about making a bunch of observations, thinking of questions, formulating hypotheses, developing testable predictions, refining those, finding data to support those, and building general theories. When we talk about this in Expedia, we've simplified this a little bit. So through tonight and when we're talking about internally, we've basically broken down the scientific method to 4 steps. So it's observe, take those observations, turn it into a hypothesis. That hypothesis is testable. Once you test it, you inevitably will learn something, and that is always leading back to new observations. So we're going to walk through this in pretty specific detail, each step tonight. We're thinking about 45 minutes, and we'll have time for some questions at the end. So getting started. Expedia got started with this method 4 to 5 years ago, and it was really 1 or 2 product teams that got started. So these teams started running tests, started using scientific method, and then once there was a base established, we expanded to all of our overall teams, and since have really expanded this to the entire company. So our product and technology teams have been working in this method for several years. However, a lot of our other organizations have adopted as well. Our IT support staff has adopted features that they roll out with a similar function. Actually, some of our HR business partners have adopted the same way, so they're defining what they want to work on next in their software and their requirements over the next coming months. And the way that we got started was with a small group of people, with a couple teams, and they had a pretty easy goal of run 10 tests between these 2 teams in a single month. And at the time, nobody thought they'd actually hit that goal. So just the amount of development needed, how we were going to code that up, how we were going to interpret all those results seemed very, very complicated at the time. But there was a goal on velocity just to get the process started. Fast forward to today, we typically will run 10 to 20 tests a month per team, even per page or feature, and we run several hundred tests every few months. So anyone that was here 6 weeks ago-ish, 5 weeks ago, our previous talk that Ralph led, who's sitting up here in front, was really on our testing tool and how we built this internally. So we can take the scientific method and we can implement tests and read between test and control and learn more and more about our customer bases. So now what we've gotten to is velocity helps us in every step. And so over time, by starting with just a group of teams and then building on top of it, we've figured out a lot of the kinks, and every team kind of goes through. As a product manager, you need to get stronger with the hypotheses that you write and what observations you find, ensuring that they are factual and not subjective, and working with your design teams. There's a lot of steps in here that just starting with velocity and getting the process started really helps. And as we got started, Expedia specifically focused on a single metric, and that was conversion. So this is pretty easy for us as an e-commerce company. If 100 people walk through the door and 50 walk away with a product, and the next day we can increase that 50 to 75, that's a huge win for us. So with setting conversion as the single metric, every team knew what they were working towards. Every product manager is finding observations and data to support tests that are geared at increasing conversion, and everyone is collectively working towards the same goal. And once that's established and we get better and better at it, we've expanded into other metrics. So we're now just as likely to test on increasing traffic to the site or a specific feature or page, increasing loyalty signups, or increasing the repeat rates of someone that's recently booked. Sometimes we'll test not so much on getting more customers, but reducing the need for a customer to call us. So if a customer calls us and has questions about the booking, that's not a great experience for the customer. So if we can gear a test at making sure they understand every piece of information when they book, then we have a lot more success, and we can measure that directly with A/B testing. At any time, though, we're always running lots of conversion tests as well. But overall, and most importantly, through the entire process of just getting started, you establish a culture of testing. So we're now to the point within Expedia that everyone within the company expects us to test any given feature, any idea into the site. And the company knows that we take a data-driven approach and we allow the data to help inform both what we'll build, but also what we'll keep, what we'll roll out, how we prioritize things. Okay, so stepping back, there are several things that we can predict using the scientific method. Talking about what to build, before we make a full investment in something, we'll often run kind of a short hacky type test to get a sense of if this is even important to our customer base. So is anyone familiar with the book The Lean Startup by Eric Ries? Great. So very, very similar to that idea, we will take what Eric describes as a minimum viable product and get it in front of our customers as soon as possible. So it may not be the full feature that we want in the long term, but before we really invest all the way into that, let's see if customers are even going to adopt as much as we're thinking and hoping they will. And then you test your way into seeing if it's actually something customers are going to use, and if it's necessary, if it's an important problem to continue to solve. And leading into that, we will test this way to decide what we want to invest in. So just because a customer is willing to use this new feature that we've added doesn't necessarily mean that it's an incremental boost to our business. So we may just transfer customers over that we've already had. We have our core base that will kind of go through everything with us. And so we will test into informing our own knowledge about what type of return we can expect on something. And it's an important tool that we have to be able to say what the cost will be of committing a set amount of resources to a project, because there's the cost of your development teams building something. So let's say we're talking about adding a new payment type, and we know that the full development to get this feature onto the site might take 6 months. Well, that 6-month cost of your development team working on it also includes the opportunity cost of anything else you would have been able to work on at the same time. So when we're modeling out what we think this is going to produce for us, we try to get some sort of benchmark on the return, and not just for an industry standard or anything, but specific to our customer base. And there's a lot of ways that we will work on this. I'll touch on it in a bit, but we will run smoke tests essentially to get a sense of what customers are really going to care about. Another way we will use this is just to predict what other problems we can solve based on previous winners, previous successes we've had on the site. So I work on the checkout pages. We sell lots of different products. If we've had a winner on one of our lines of business, it's very likely that we can solve a similar problem on another line of business. We may try and apply that same learning elsewhere. Also, all of our shopping teams are working on this, all of the various teams that we work with. So if there was something that was successful in a shopping path, clarified some information for a customer, created some sense of urgency or confidence that they want to book, oftentimes if we carry that same message through booking, it will increase our overall experience and customer experience. So it's really important to always be looking at what's working on the site overall. And probably even more important is what's not working. So any product owner that works on a product should know their glaring weaknesses, and they should really be spending time trying to improve those. I could spend a lot of time talking about several of the weaknesses we're trying to work on, and a couple of people I work with are in the back. But to give you guys an example, in checkout, we have a very hard time getting people to sign into their accounts when using a mobile phone. So when we compare the experience of you're checking out something in you are a account holder now, on your phone compared to on desktop, we see a huge drop on people using the phone. And then so we're trying to find observations and data to point to exactly why that is. So can they not find where you sign in? Is there a discoverability issue? Is some piece of the functionality broken or not working correctly? And that really leads us into informing how we go about testing into improvement, how we invest in improving the future. And overall, what we're talking about is thinking through the customer behaviors we know about the site at any given time, and what we've seen change and what we expect to change as the site's changing. So there's two things here on customer behavior. One is our own site is going to evolve at any given time. When we're running hundreds of tests every few months, inevitably features that were there 2, 3, 4 years ago and may have been very, very successful may not have the same impact they once did. So we are always retesting features. We kind of think through like nothing is sacred. So if you have data to support retesting a feature, testing if this is even important during the customer process, we'll always run those types of tests. And then on the other side, customers in general are going to evolve. So back on the same example of sign-in on mobile, like every company, we've seen obviously this massive adoption of mobile use and mobile phones. Several years ago, Expedia moved all of our pages to a responsive design. So we have the same experience from desktop down to mobile. If you shop on one and book on the other, it should be pretty similar in your experience. But at the time, that was very much still a massive amount of our traffic coming from desktop experiences. So we had shoved a lot of the experience onto mobile. It's technically similar, but we were solving a lot of our problems for our desktop users. And what we've seen over the last 6, 12, 18 months is a much faster adoption of mobile as a piece of our traffic than we expected. And we're seeing people a lot more likely to book something, some massive trip on their phone than we previously were really thinking through and solving. So that behavior has radically changed from what we expected and how quickly we expected it. So, when we learn that about our customers, then we now need to walk back through, is what is working still working as well as it was? What type of focus is there on what is not working? How does that impact our investments that we need to make? Do we need to rethink some of our features or rethink where we're spending our resources overall? Overall, we make a lot of assumptions, go try and find data to support those assumptions and test, and we are absolutely wrong very, very often. It is a good thing, as we all talk about, as obviously talked about a lot in tech. It's fine to fail when you fail fast, and using our testings and our internal testing tools like Abacus, it allows us that process as long as we learn why and we can pivot from there. So let's walk through the steps. To start with observations, the core skill of a scientist is to collect observations, and we think about product management in the same way. So our product managers should always be observing, asking questions, challenging things, asking why, and trying to uncover the customer problems that are really worth solving. And so we collect observations in a lot of different places. First and foremost, we collect a lot of customer data, site performance data, and I think this drives the majority of our observations. So they're very factual based. They are performance that we can track and targeted metrics that we can improve. But we do use a lot of other sources. So we're always talking to customers, friends and family that use this website, anyone that hears you work at Expedia and stops you. Last time I went through customs, someone laid out how terrible of a flight booking experience it was for me. So I kind of had to listen since she had my passport at the time. But it's important to always be chatting with them and try to understand, what this experience is differently, because, internally we spend so much time on the site. We're such power users that some of the problems we think are problems, other customers may not even notice. And then vice versa, information flow and how the architectures actually leads you through a path, should be really simple. And sometimes we run into issues that customers are facing without even knowing. We spend a lot of time looking at overall industry best practices. So this best practices with e-commerce, best practices with mobile in general, but then also with the travel industry. So we very closely will watch what our competitors are doing, any other online travel agent, anyone that's selling a similar product, and if they're running tests and they roll something out, we want to know why they've made that choice. So we'll oftentimes try the same theory. So if they solve some problem for their travel customers, it's very likely that our travel customers could benefit from the same thing. And even if they don't, we want to learn what they've learned. So if they decided to invest in changing some sort of functionality, we want to know why, so we can try and see if this is something that we also need to solve. And then finally, we'll use our internal research teams. That's all that says. Internal research teams, I can see. So we have research labs around the world, and we will put actually live customers into lab and watch them interact with our site or our new feature that we're going to work on. So I have a couple pictures of this here. There's a couple different ways we can use this, and there's some really cool functionality that we get to play with. So on the left here, what you can see is someone getting hooked up to electrodes on their face, and this is called facial electromyography, and this can measure emotion. So if we are putting something in front of potential customers for the first time, we can measure what their reactions are as they walk through the experience. So for example, if we were going to change the way that we show you hotel search results, and as you're scrolling through and finding a hotel, we're going to use different images. If we put someone in the lab and hook them up to these machines, we could watch what the experience is of actually shopping and booking. So we as a company believe that booking travel should be a fun experience. So our design teams are very, very focused on improving that. And we have metrics that we talk about here, which is delight. So this machine can essentially measure the amount of delight that you have, or if we're causing more friction than we really need to. And then on the right here, you have some of our researchers and designers who are just watching a live demonstration. Another way that we'll use these is we will watch a customer interact and we can see their screen so we know where they're clicking, but we also have eye tracking so we can see where they're looking in addition to where they're clicking. So is there anything else on the page that's distracting them? Are they finding the feature that we're working to improve? Is there something in here that we're missing? So we'll grab a lot of observations out of these to produce new tests. All right, moving over to hypotheses. So the most important thing with forming a good hypothesis is that you're talking about a single change. So this change should be based on the observations you just collected. Those observations should be factual, based in data, and this hypothesis needs to be measurable, specific to what you expect to learn. So what do you expect to have happen out of this one change you're going to make? And the most important thing here is that it's a single change. What we often find with product managers, and I'm guilty of this too, is we know where we want to get to. So if we can combine a couple changes in a single test, kind of bet forward on that, sometimes we take that risk. And the problem there is if you make two changes at once and run a test and it doesn't go as you planned, you now don't know why. So example is early in 2015, we were working to improve some of our account creation modules. So if you're booking anything on our site, any of our checkout pages have a place where if you're a guest user, you could set a password and create an account. And we had rolled out a couple newer versions of this module. And so we were trying to take that same module and test it onto some of the larger paths that had yet to adopt it. And so after we designed the test and started coding it, we realized that where you collect email address differed in the new version compared to our core version. And so on hotels where I was running this test, email address was collected right above where you say, yeah, sure, I'll give you a password and I'll set an account. And so in this new test, we moved it up out of the way. So we ran the test, absolutely bombed account creation. And then I had to go in front of our leadership and explain that I spent a month coding this and a couple months running the test, and I have no idea what happened, and I have no next steps other than we're going to step back and we're going to methodically now walk through each change. Because the module itself is very different. There was different color and design, different benefits messaging, where it sits on the page, the color contrast to the rest of the page. However, outside of all of those various things that you could, decide, hey, this is data based on this previous test, it might be this, we also moved the email address up. And so we had no idea what we learned, and so it was another reminder of, even though we clearly see where we want to get, we will always try to methodically walk through this so we know exactly what happens on the site in any given test. This is the only template I have in the deck, and we typically don't use templates within product, but around writing a hypothesis, we try to preach very, very much that it's consistent across the board. So by making some sort of change that you describe, we expect to see this measurable quantifiable lift or decrease if it's something we want to get rid of. So if we're decreasing cancellation rate, you'd be talking about that in your hypothesis. And an example here is by displaying urgency messaging for the last room available in checkout, customers will feel a sense of urgency to complete their booking, and we'll see an increase in conversion. So, one example of one we've done. Any questions on hypothesis in general? Good. Okay, moving over to testing. So testing is where we spend a lot of our time, and we need to because this is essentially us trying to find the truth. So we spend the time to collect the observations, write the hypothesis, but when you're committing your resources, you're spending your own time and resources and your engineering time to develop tests. It's super important that we find out, what if this hypothesis is correct or not. And so that's absolutely data over opinion. It's really not a situation here where I put forward a test and some VP in a different area disagrees and can stop the test. So we argue constantly, that I think all product managers do. We'll argue the theory behind where we collected this data and if it's testable or not, but we'll always get to run the test. And the data from the customers is really what will inform the decision. So it's never an opinion-based thing that's going to win. And as I mentioned earlier, there's really nothing sacred on the site. So even some of our core functionality that's been there for years can be retested and even tested off just so we can see the impact. Even if we're not planning to remove it, sometimes we'll just try to see, what else has changed with the site and is there something that we need to learn, or the amount of money we think this gets us, is that still consistent? It's absolutely a democracy of ideas too. So as a product owner, the role that you play here is collecting these ideas from everywhere and sifting through to decide if there's data to support this idea and deciding if this is a problem that needs solving. So all of us have limited resources. There's a lot that we could do at any given time. If you think this is something that you want to prioritize and spend resources on, it's important to make sure you have data to support it. But these ideas should come from everywhere. So it's not a situation where the product owners are the only ones out searching for observations or trying to find problems to solve. I would say most of the things that I've been a part of here that have been most successful have come from our development teams, just because they're so much closer to the interactions of modules and on the site. And so, it's your job as a product owner to collect those ideas and have a democracy about it, and then go find the data to support the problem and support writing a hypothesis. And finally, it's, we always have a bias towards learning in anything we do. So if we're committing resources to something, if we think it's worth spending time on, we should be learning something either about our customers or about our product or our site overall. And what we're trying to accomplish is building a full knowledge base as a company. Okay, so the three main types of A/B testing that we will use. I mentioned earlier smoke tests. So we will use smoke tests a lot to decide if something's worth actually investing in. So for an example, can someone give me a payment type that's super, super popular in some place? Anything you can throw out? PayPal? We already have PayPal. Do another one. Bitcoin. Perfect. Okay. So there is data to suggest that, let's say, our customer base in Mexico has radically adopted Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is becoming a very, very common way that people use, a common currency that people use to purchase all sorts of goods on e-commerce. And so there's a business case to say, if we start accepting Bitcoin on our Mexican point of sale, this is going to be a huge boost to our local business there. But we know that it's going to be 4 months of development. It impacts a lot of different teams. We have to line up all the dependencies. So before we'd actually go through that full investment, we might run a test to just add Bitcoin to their checkout page or even in the shopping page and say, hey, here's Bitcoin, and try to capture how many people will interact with that. So purely non-functional. I'm sure not every customer experience on clicking on that and finding out it just says coming soon, exclamation point, is great, but it allows us to try to collect the number of clicks we get, and then we can do some napkin math to try to set some sort of opportunity against that. So if we get 100 people into our hotel checkout and 20 of them will click on that, then we can take that percentage and apply that against what we expect to convert typically, and then try to model out if we can attract new customers, or if we're just going to kind of move the current customers that we have over to another payment type that they have. There's actually a smoke test that we are running now on the insurance side. I'll give you guys a live example. So we're talking about building out a product to protect the price dropping. So if you are about to book a flight and you're worried about, oh, is this, I think this price might drop, I might want to hold off. We could build an insurance product so you basically capture that if the price does drop, you can get that money back. But there's a lot of complexity to build that out, so we're basically running the same thing I just described. Checkmark, trying to help us understand if in the US, are people going to use this? Is this even something that we should take a 7-8 month development project on? So moving over to feature qualification, what we're talking about here is really getting the actual feature onto the site. So at this point, we have decided this is something we want to invest in, the company's behind it, we're moving forward, but when we actually add it to the website, we don't always expect it to be perfect when we get it on there. So a lot of times the goal is if we can get this on and it's neutral, it doesn't impact booking, or even, if there's a bit of lessons that we think we're going to have to train our customers to use this new feature, we can just get it on and then see what kind of gap there may be that we need to make up. But we'd always test on and not always expect it to be perfect when we get it there. And then that really leads over to feature optimization. So with feature optimization, we are improving any feature we have on any of our pages, any feature that you have as a product owner at all times. So we spend probably the most time on feature optimization, and these are when we're improving, messaging to the customer, the interactions that the customer has, the best practices that we see in e-commerce or in mobile. Our customers getting tripped up in some specific way? Is there different messaging we can push, or do we need to create more urgency for the customer so they understand that there's a limited amount of inventory? So there's a lot of time we'll spend on feature optimizations, and then that is always leading back into what other areas do we have that we should invest in? Are there other features that we should build out and add into the page? I read something recently that was very interesting that we're talking a lot about in product, which is our role is not just to continuously add more features to the page. You can often overcomplicate your product if you're just adding more and more features. And so another part of the job is to look and see, what could you remove? What is the core functionality that you need? And, what could we possibly get rid of based on, evolving customers, evolving site? All right, so walking through a very quick example, and I realize everyone probably outside of the front row can't see this very well, but this is a screenshot of our hotel checkout page at one point, and what you guys have is on the left here is really where you're entering your information, you're going to enter your payment details, and then on the right is where you are basically going to confirm your trip, so hotel details, check-in, check-out, and price. So we had seen some data to show that customers were increasingly booking the wrong dates. So they're calling us to either change their booking or needing to cancel, and oftentimes that was a non-refundable, so it gets complex for both parties, or just the overall cancellation rate online was increasing. And so it seemed like customers were not reading this information here. So then when I looked at some of our competitors, I noticed one of our biggest competitors had recently shifted where they confirm all of their hotel information in the path. And so I set up a test with the hypothesis being by moving this trip summary information that we have on the right to the left, customers are going to confirm that their hotel choice, check-in, check-out, and price is accurate before they start filling out anything in the details. And so the success metrics of this test were a reduction in both calls and cancellation rates without impacting booking. So that was our overall goal. Internally, I think this probably caused more grief than anything just because people looked at the page and thought it was broken. But outside of that, is a simple test to code up, just try to solve that problem of customers not confirming the details. I'll tell you guys, it didn't work at all. I just thought it was a good, colorful example. It literally didn't go one way or the other. It just, customers couldn't be bothered to change their behavior at all. So, very fun example for us. All right, and on that, I mean, that was an example of something we didn't really learn if that was the wrong way to try to solve it, or if there was something within our test that wasn't necessarily bold enough. But when we're talking about learning, the most important thing here is how do we know if something worked? So being very, very clear on how you define success is paramount when you're spending any of your own time and anyone else's time on a given test or feature. So when we will talk with our design teams in early days about a customer problem that we want to solve, one of the most important things we lay out, and they're very, very good at, is ensuring that we know what success looks like. So just because we have data to show that this is a problem doesn't mean we know what we're actually trying to achieve. So we always talk through, both with design, our analytics team and our development team, so everyone's on the same page around this is a customer problem that we've decided is worth solving, so we're going to prioritize it, and this is how we think we're going to solve it, and this is how we'll measure if that's true or not. So that is why we always talk through, like, these are the success metrics of a given test. This is what we're hoping to achieve. These are some of the secondary and tertiary impacts we think we could have. But when we talk about the testing, and this relates very closely to what Rob presented in our previous talk, anyone that didn't see that, I know we have mixed audiences, I think those videos are available. So ask us and we can get that. But we have internal test tools that allow us to run tests and measure control of how the page used to be against this change we've made. And with that, we use statistical analysis and try to use a consistent model across the company. So, I can't claim that something's a winner just because it looked like it was going well, and I get it out there before anyone realizes. We have standards that we use. So we'll use a 90% confidence interval as a standard, where if it stays above that or below that consistently, we can definitively say this was a winner or a loser. And we're willing as a company to take a bit of variance, knowing that there's a risk that you may find a false positive. But that's okay, because we have a standard to do this, and there's a set amount of time that we think that will happen. This second graph up here might be very hard to see in the back. Pretend there's a line like this, and essentially what we're saying is something may reach significance, but if it doesn't stay there and it keeps dropping up and down, we wouldn't roll that out. So we have a standard for how long something needs to maintain its significance before we consider it a winner or a loser. But overall, the goal is to learn. It's not at all to be right, because we are very rarely right when we do this, I think. At any given time, we typically see that our tests and ideas will be right and be a winner for the metric that we've decided about a third of the time. And it's just as likely that we have a losing test. But both of those get check marks, even though that's kind of a frowny face, because we've definitively learned something about either our customers or our site. So the idea that we put forward, our customers have responded in their booking or actions to show us that that's not the right experience. We're not solving the right problem with that. What we always are trying to avoid is the neutrals and conclusives, because we can't definitively say that we learned anything. So the goal is always to learn something, not necessarily to have winners. That being said, we're all super competitive. We all want as many winners as we can, but I'm never much better than 33% here. So, this is pretty self-explanatory, but the more traffic you expose to anything, the better sense we'll get from customers and the faster signals we'll get. It's a call out that we won't test on some holdout group of our base. We absolutely test on all of our traffic at all times. So if you pull up a couple different browsers and walk through the same experience, it's very likely that you could get bucketed in some of the things that we're trying to work on and improve. And we'll run a lot of our tests globally when we can, so that we get a sense of, is this solution that we've laid out to this problem, is it going to work in all languages and all cultures? So we have consistency everywhere, and we're not just trying to solve, on some of our biggest points of sale. And I've mentioned this, but the more and more tests we run, the more we learn, and so the velocity really mitigates the risk. On one hand, we get better and better at it. We get better as the product owners writing the tests. We get better with how we're interpreting the results. With what Ralph went through, we get much better with ensuring that we're measuring the right feature that we've changed. So over time, you can see that Expedia's gotten better and better at running these tests where we used to not run anything. So, and this just allows us to get a lot bolder and take more chances and be more creative, because in theory, we're always strengthening the experience, and we can always take some risks and change the experience. Okay, so stepping back from that process to look at kind of how this all fits in with what we're doing, there is a giant arrow pointing like this that none of you can see, but I wasn't very good at PowerPoint, so I couldn't figure out how to make it darker. We just pretend we're all connecting here, all right? So when we talk about first principles, we're talking about overall on the site. We're going to fix that real quick. So first principles. What we're talking about is, essentially it should be pretty consistent for all teams. We are trying to match travel products to travel shoppers. 1 second. Cool. Okay, so principle we have here is we have travel products, we need to match them to our shoppers. And as a product owner, I may have a thesis on that where it fits in with the product I work on, which is basically our thesis here is, what's the big idea? What's a big customer problem that I'm trying to work on? So if I work on our flight shopping pages, I may have a thesis that says, I think customers should be able to filter their results by anything they want to find the best route for them. And so if that's my big thesis, I could have several different hypotheses around that thesis. And they're all individual, they all are changing something different, they all have data to support that hypothesis, but it rolls up to the same general theme of where we're going. So each one of those tests obviously will learn something, and then you guys will hopefully see those learnings go back through the system. So we're always learning and always going through, and remember there's a big arrow that's across the entire screen. So we have one more giant arrow, pretend it's there again. Really what we're talking about as an overall company, how this fits in. We have our company priorities, so overall Expedia is projecting out lots of different things. So what we want to achieve in the next quarter, obviously what we want to achieve this year and for the following year. And Expedia is also a big fan of setting BHAGs for the next 3 to 5 years. So lots of people probably know this, but the term is big, hairy, audacious goals. So we as a company will set those, and our CEO will communicate those and our progress quarterly as we are working towards it over several years. When you drop down to that, our site strategy, again, very simple, connected to what I was talking about with the first principles. We are trying to connect travel customers to our travel products. And so our site thesis is really around simplifying that process and ensuring that customers are connected to exactly what they want and the best available product to them. So then as product managers, we fit in very closely in about a 120-day window. And so at any point, we're planning out what is it that we could accomplish in the next 4 months. And we try to avoid as much as possible locking in our roadmaps for a year, getting stuck in the massive migrations, because just as customer behaviors change, our site changes, and we may be way behind the game if we end up doing that. So, as we're in planning for the next 120 days, depending on what you have going on, you're, reading a lot of the results of tests and the learnings that you're collecting now to help inform you. You're also, setting up new tests you now may be able to run based on dependencies that have lined up. So our product owners are spending a lot of their time, 3 and 6 and 9 months down the road, but that can always change based on the results that you get on tests you're running now and as the site evolves. There's a couple different ways we use this depending on where you are in your cycles. So you can collect ideas and pitches from stakeholders, or you can kind of just inform them of, we're very clear what we're trying to accomplish, and it may take a little bit longer to add Bitcoin to Mexico. Past that, if there is a project that we decide is important as a company and we invest in it, we will get all impacted teams and stakeholders in a room, hash it out in what we refer to as just an inception. So it's very clear on the scope, the dependencies, what the requirements are, and we'll get started. Like a lot of agile companies, we work in sprints. So as the product owner, you can see where your tests and where your features fit into an individual sprint over time, what you can expect to have an output, and how that plays into what you're trying to accomplish for the next 3 to 4 months. And then finally here, it says monthly product review. So Expedia has done this for several years, where every month we get all of our product teams together globally, and all of our peers, and we present. It's basically a 30-day stand-up. So we present to our peers and our leadership, this is what we accomplished in the last 30 days. These are the tests we've wrapped up. These are the learnings we have out of that. And then this is what we're going to do in the next 30 days. So these are the new tests. This is the test structure. This is the data I found. This is the hypothesis I have. This is something that we hope to accomplish in the next 30 days. And it's very open feedback. And the point of it is clear transparency on what you're doing, the rationale you've had with it, and you get a lot of feedback both from your peers as well as leadership on exactly how you've gone about the thinking. So it's not necessarily an opinion of, I don't think that test is going to work, I don't like what you are doing here. It's really about, how did you collect this data? Are you changing multiple things in the test? Are we clear on what we're hoping to achieve? Is that the right success metric or the right way to use this? And so the point of this is that you can quickly pivot if needed, and you can adjust based on feedback. And it's rarely something you need to change. It's more something to be aware of, or depending on the result that comes, a follow-up feature, a follow-up test that you could run. But overall, I think the point of our product org and how we think about this is, we're testing everything we have, every feature that we have on our products, and always trying to analyze how well they're performing, what areas we're lacking, and how changes in the environment, changes on our site have impacted the things that we think are strongest core, as well as the areas we know may be weaknesses. So there's a couple ways that we identify that, data, talking to people, but we're always trying to tinker to create the best possible experience for our customers. And so it might be a very large pivot from what our previous plans were, and it might just be small feature optimizations that we do. But that's where we spend as much time as we can. That's all I got.